Hi, I'm Gail Bannock.
And I'm Alana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the She Means Business podcast. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Sarah Branfman. Sarah is a seasoned sales leader with a proven track record of building and scaling teams and driving revenue. She is currently the Global Vice President of ISV at Databricks, where she builds strategic go-to-market initiatives with software and data companies. Prior to that, she spent 11 years in sales at MongoDB, working in areas like cloud, tech, and OEM sales. Before her tech sales career, Sarah was a journalist for the NBC Nightly News and a professional ballet dancer in New York City. Passionate about helping others achieve their potential, she advises companies and runs a nonprofit aimed at driving growth and success for women. She is the mom of 2 young kids, and we are thrilled to have her here with us today. So welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Alana and Gail. I'm so happy to be here.
So you have a really interesting background, a lot of things that were kind of outside of the tech realm and then a lot in the tech realm. So why don't you give us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. So it all started on a warm December 25th in Miami, Florida. No, but that's where I was born. I grew up in South Texas. As most stories start. And growing up in South Texas in a pretty small town, I moved to New York as soon as I could. And in New York City, I was a professional ballet dancer, as you said. I did this while on scholarship at NYU. Towards the end of university, I dabbled in marketing and advertising and finance positions. I also pursued journalism, also like you mentioned. For journalism, I worked at NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, which was super exciting. I saw and learned a whole lot there. I worked for a newspaper in Brooklyn, a magazine for in Queens. And then through a series of events, I found my way into tech sales. And that's where it's all been, from there. And initially, I joined a company called Blue Wolf. They've now been acquired by IBM. I fell in love with startups. That's how I learned about and started working with MongoDB. It was called Tengen back at the time. That's where I joined in 2011. And my MongoDB journey, that goes from a 30-person startup to a multi-billion-dollar tech enterprise. So I learned a lot there. Also really exciting. I was the first enterprise salesperson at the company, which meant focusing on understanding our users' specific needs from both a technical and a business perspective. When I was an enterprise sales rep, I opened up over 110 net new logos. It was across every major vertical, from healthcare, fins, media, retail, everything. Some of the largest global brands to some of the fastest growing startups. And I drove millions of dollars for this open source product that a lot of people just thought was free. And that was like the first part of MongoDB. From there, I became known as the person that our CEOs and CROs, we had several through my 11 years there, that they would call on whenever they needed something to be built or when something was in crisis. So I built out our cloud sales, figuring out how to price and package it and how to sell MongoDB SaaS solutions, transformed our inside sales into a high-performing incremental quota-carrying team. I rebuilt sales development, increasing sales productivity by almost 300% and building and scaling a global force across Texas, Ireland, and India. I built the ISV and OEM sales. That's
Tell us what that is.
Working with companies. Yeah.
I thought maybe for our non-techies out there, there's a lot of acronyms being thrown around here.
A lot.
If you don't mind me.
No, please. I was thinking about that as I was saying it. So you think about ISV and OEM sales as working with companies who are building their own customer-facing B2B products. And these products can either build everything top to bottom, or they can pick out some things that they're just going to be able to build on top of. So MongoDB was the engine powering many of these different types of companies because it didn't make sense for these companies to go and build a database They instead were building whatever their product was, the competitive differentiation of their product. So taking that into the software world, I built out what that practice was. And these tend to be, in the software world, quite complex deals because you're building into these companies' core products. So my team crafted how this even worked, and this resulted in some of the largest and most complex deals for the company. Of course, we had to build playbooks for this to scale. We couldn't have it where it was always myself or someone from the team driving all of these deals. So through building the playbooks and enabling and seeing a whole lot of different things, we were able to grow that business by over 600%. And that was my first step into the partner world, or indirect sales or channel sales. It has all different sorts of names.
So you moved from MongoDB to Databricks, and that was a few years ago. And what has that journey been like, going from kind of that exceptional growth trajectory to a company that was, I think, a little bit more established, or maybe not?
Yeah, they were about the same size when I left MongoDB and came to Databricks, but just very different for what was possible. I wasn't looking to leave. I was very happy at MongoDB. I was getting another promotion, expanded remit. I loved my team, loved the product, all of that. But the more that I learned about Databricks, I was talking to the founders. I was talking to some of the investors that I knew personally. I was talking to customers. The more that I saw it would be irresponsible if I didn't take that leap.
Right.
It has a huge TAM, a really special group of people, an amazing product, an opportunity to have a massive impact. But if we think about it from a really personal perspective, a lot of it came to me needing to prove myself to myself. I have this agonizing self-doubt. I have the imposter syndrome that so many of us have. And I was at Databricks or at MongoDB for so long, and I wrapped so much of my identity into it. And it was my husband, actually, he pushed me on this one. He said, Sarah, you believe that you're successful because of MongoDB. And maybe that's true. Maybe you're nothing better. And you've only done what you've done because you were in the right place at the right time. So, but it could be the other way around. And I think you need to go and prove to yourself which one of those it is. And so far we're doing okay.
I figured that was the answer. You seem quite happy.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't be more excited for what we're building. At Databricks, I look after what we call the ISV business. So again, those are independent software vendors. It's those technology integrations that I was talking through. It's the OEMs, we call them built-ons. It's everything around data collaboration and data sharing. Think about all the data that's out there and how it can get blended to drive impressive insights that companies then fuel their business on. And it's an amazing team. We've seen exponential growth, and people are going to write books about what we're doing, and I'm just humbled to be a part of this and to be able to make that impact.
So it's interesting to listen to your career, because I mean you're using a lot of technical terms, and I, given my background, I can kind of follow along with what you're talking about. But really, at the end of the day, it is a very complex area of the tech world that you are immersed in and have been immersed in for over a decade. But you talked about your start too as being kind of in journalism. I mean, it's very interesting kind of pivot that you made early on. And then to be so technical, 10, 15 years later, talk about, I'm just curious about, have you used some of that early learnings from journalism in the work you do? How did you go about learning this area for something you weren't schooled in before, or is that traditional? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll start from a little bit of a different angle, because I think of it less as a pivot from journalism to tech, or ballet to journalism, or anything that I've ever done before I did something else. And I think of it more of the different ways that you can apply your skills, your experiences, your passions, and specifically how you apply those to whatever your end goal is. Whether the end goal is, I want to have this amount of money, or I want to be a doctor, I want to be a CEO, I want to have financial freedom, I want to have impact. Your end goal can be whatever it is that speaks to you, and it's the application of that. So maybe I'll start first from the ballet story because that was my complete life for a little more than 2 decades. And I think that gave me the foundation for who and what I am. If I sum it up, it taught me communication, yearning for feedback, grit, ruthless prioritization, all these things that both of you guys as business execs, as our whole audience here, those are things that it doesn't matter what part it's in. It's an important foundation. So when I think about communication, dance is a way of communicating. Martha Graham, who some folks might be familiar with, but she was a dancer, a choreographer. She's known for reshaping American modern dance. She said, dance is the hidden language of the soul. And I couldn't agree more than that. It helped me to see so many different ways to express myself, and there's a whole lot you can say without opening your mouth. And we can all see that in the boardrooms. We can see it over the Zoom calls. So just understanding that. The feedback one, I talk about this a lot with teams, with other folks who I mentor. From a ballet perspective, if you aren't getting critiqued, then it's because you're not worth investing in. And that taught me really early on to love feedback.
That is
that's
gold, what you just
gold.
said.
It's also kind of a lie because nobody loves feedback, and that's okay. I much prefer to be told that I'm awesome. But with the feedback, embrace it. Be gracious for it. I see feedback as a gift, and through being someone who I hope others would agree is pretty good at receiving feedback, people should feel more comfortable in giving it to me. And the more feedback I get, the better I can become. So I love how you said that, Gail, that it's gold.
It's just gold. I love that. I want to just have that on my wall. It's a great segue, I think. So as a woman in a space that is predominantly men, or filled with men, and very fast paced, and how have you navigated this space? Have you had any challenges being a woman in this space, and how have you navigated those?
So at first, I didn't even notice it. In fact, the first time I noticed that I was a woman in a male-dominated space, it was several years into my career. I was speaking at an event. Someone raised their hand and they asked me how it was to be the only woman in a room of men. And I then started to look around in my day-to-day life, and I saw, oh, that's kind of true. My colleagues, my bosses, my customers, there were no or very few women. That's back when I was an individual contributor, and I was several $1 million above the second highest performer. So I do think that in some roles it doesn't really matter. When you outperform others, it doesn't matter what you are. And that's, it is similar to some ballet stories, actually, that we haven't met in person, but someday when we will, or what, Ilana, you might have heard from others who we both know, I might think I'm 10 feet tall, but I'm almost 5 feet on a measuring tape. And, back from a ballet perspective, I always had more of an athletic build than what you would typically think of for a ballerina. And that meant I just had to work so much harder because I couldn't be put in the corps de ballet, which is basically when a lot of people are on the stage at one time, everyone's got to look uniform, and I never looked like that. So from very early on, I innately, or I inherently wasn't whatever everyone else was. I knew that to be successful in ballet, I was going to have to work a whole lot harder. I was going to have to be a soloist, because when I was on stage by myself, it didn't matter how big I was the only one there. So if I apply that to what we're talking about here, being in a room of all men, you have to work harder and you have to be better than anyone else so that you can get your solo parts in whatever it is your business is. So the same as it didn't matter that I was a woman in tech, it didn't matter that I had a different build in ballet.
Do you wear heels? As a short person myself, I'm curious because I used to always, and then somebody said something to me and they're like, you're still short. That doesn't actually make a difference. You're just uncomfortable. And so I was like, you know what? Why should I be uncomfortable in a room full of all these tall men when really it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The thing is, so yes, I do wear heels. I love heels. I just love to suffer, I think, is the reality.
It gets you to 5 feet, guaranteed.
I'm a guaranteed 5 feet. The funny thing about that as a tangent is In real life, my husband is 6'3", and I believe that we're the same size.
Same.
And occasionally, occasionally there'll be women who are, under, I'd say like about 5'5", and I feel like I tower over them. I just feel Amazonian, and it makes me so uncomfortable because for whatever reason, I just like.
I'm the same.
So to your
I
thing
feel
on
like
the
I'm
heels,
the same height as people. I'm really not.
Yeah. And I'll look at pictures sometimes. It's the funniest with, especially myself and my husband. I'll look at pictures and I'll say, like, that looks so weird. It looks like they just Photoshop pulled the sides out, of you because you're definitely not that much bigger than I am.
And I love that you don't let that get to you. And I think that's also something because it's one thing to be the only woman in the room. It's another to be a small person and you need to kind of take up space. And so I think that there's a lot of lessons there. Curious, we talk a lot about mentorship on this podcast and seeing as you were, the only one of your kind in many rooms, how have mentors helped you or shaped you? Have you had anybody in your life that's helped you along the way?
I mean, definitely I'm where I am because of the community, because of all of those around me. And I think it's really important to find whatever it is that you need to get what you need done. You can either be feeling bad about yourself or you can be too busy just getting things done. So when I think of mentors, I think very much in terms of surrounding myself with people who I want to be. And I think a lot of people who are mentors for me, I'm mentors back to them. And that also goes into being a big believer of less talking and more doing. I want to make things easier for all the amazing women who are going to come after me. At MongoDB, I was a founding member of this group called Sell Like a Girl.
I love that.
Well, it was, of course, very inspired by those Super Bowl commercials, if you remember. I think it was Dove.
Run Like a Girl. Gives me goosebumps every time.
Totally. And it was myself and a handful of execs that wanted to create a place to connect, to network, to share our challenges, to share our triumphs. We did focus it on a really narrow audience because we wanted to have real impact. And there are certain challenges that different groups just have that are a little bit different than others. And it's, that goes a lot into just being true to who you are, the same as those commercials where don't try to be someone else. Women are really successful in business and especially in sales because we are women. We have characteristics around empathy, around listening really well, around not being seen as competitive, and all of those sorts of things help us to better understand customers or think a little bit differently for how to drive forward the business. So that's a lot about being authentic.
Do you have a mentor that you've thought about in your past that's really kind of helped shape where you've gotten to today?
When I think about the ones that had the biggest, most profound impacts, one speaks a lot to what not to do. I was in a coaching session with a top executive several years ago, and we were talking about what I wanted to do with my career. And I said that I wanted to be a CEO. And he told me that, he said, Sarah, you just don't sound serious when you say things like that. You're going to have a lot more credibility with other people if you shoot for being a GM.
And what was his rationale for that? What was the rationale for that?
Just that, CEO is, it can be all these different things. And instead, a GM effectively has what all those components are. And you sound silly when you say you want to be a CEO. You sound like a kid who, wants to be a firefighter or anything else. And it rattled me.
That is so gutting. I can't even imagine how I would react to that. How did you react?
Well, I was gutted. It rattled me. I'd never been told that I couldn't do something. And now I had a really credible source basically saying, hey, Sarah, that's cute, but aim lower. So
Did you go back to him, or did you find another person to talk to?
No, he's really impactful and has helped me in many other parts of life. But that always sticks with me, which also shows like you got to embrace feedback. I love to hear different people's perspectives. All of it is just good information for what do I want, how do I want to be to others, what's productive. I, of course, refuse to reset my own ambitions because of this person's view of the world. I know I had to trust myself, and you can do whatever it is you want to do.
So you've obviously worked hard to find your voice and find who you are among, at times, I guess, some people who might say differently. But also, I think you talked about your transition from MongoDB to Databricks and how you had to kind of go prove to yourself. How did you find that confidence in yourself, and how do you continue to do that? And where, you've just talked about a challenge you've run into, but like, how do you just kind of keep going through those challenges, and how do you use those pieces of feedback to drive you?
So much to unload there. I think where we can start is definitely, my life is filled with challenges, the same as everyone's. I told the story about that person who said aim lower. I think another thing, this is particular to being a woman in a very male-dominated world, it's that people have innate biases. Said differently, certain behaviors are rewarded for men and they're penalized for women. Through my career, I promise I'm getting to the answer of finding my voice. But part of my voice is that I talk too much, and I got to figure out what my point is. No, but in this particular example, where I'm getting to is that I was authentic, I trusted myself. But in this example, I was up for promotion, and I had driven the right results, but my promotion was rejected because there was feedback that I was really aggressive and that I was a bulldozer. And the person who shared this feedback, they were extraordinarily successful, a very senior executive. They had built and sold companies. Candidly, the feedback sounded a whole lot like a description of that person and part of why they had achieved so much. And that hit me really hard too, because all the things that had made me such an asset for that company and the very thing that I believed would drive a promotion for a man, it's what was now holding me back. So, I didn't blame that executive who shared the feedback or the people who had submitted the feedback that person came and shared with me. Humans are humans, we can't help it. But again, I take it all as information, and and it helped me to see, well, what am I going to do with this? Because I am a little bit aggressive, and it is what helps to drive me forward. And just because I'm a small, at that point, young woman, and they didn't think, whether they were intentional about it or not, like they didn't think those were the right things, I knew that was me. And I had to stay true to me. Another version of this is I'm a little bit quirky. And for many years, I was told by mentors, by coaches, by just different people in the community of how I should look. There was a call once with a senior person at a customer of ours, and I said y'all. I'm from Texas. I say y'all. I don't mean to, but I do. And it took me so long to live that down because that didn't sound like the professional executive representing our company based on one person's feedback. There are just different things that you could talk about or different words that you say. And I was told for so long to fit into this mold of exactly what a tech exec looked like. And I tried really hard, but I'm never going to be any of those people. So the more that I tried to, I would take crazy notes and I would literally read off things that I'd heard other people say, and I would try to make it mine, but it wasn't me. And as soon as I said, you know what? You're not too bad. I think you can be you. Take the things that you love from others, take away the things that you don't, and just be you. My confidence grew, my career grew, and the impact that I was able to have on the companies I worked for, at the customers I worked with the partners I was collaborating with, and with all the people, my teams, it was much more. So I don't know if that that's where we were going with it, but that's my answer. That's what you made me think of.
It's great insight into how you really find who you are within where you are.
So Sarah, a question we like to ask all of our guests is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self? I wonder if it's going to be a version of what you just said, but if not, that's okay too.
Yeah, it's probably a version of that. I mean, the reality is it wouldn't matter. When I was younger, I knew that I knew everything. So it wouldn't matter what I told myself. But the more that I've learned... What
would you tell your younger self that might listen to you?
That's right. Well, and even what do I tell myself now, where I have a sister who's much younger than me, and she's embarking on a similar journey to what I have, what I've done. And I think regardless of age or gender or role or anything else, it's trust yourself. You got to work really hard and be adaptable. And you have to stay authentic. Again, I spent so much of my time early on trying to fit into a mold that wasn't who I was. And once I embraced myself, everything else lifted.
That's great. That's a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really enjoyed talking to you and learned so much. And we're both very impressed with your accomplishments, what you've done, and having met you now, the way that you do it and your approach, which I think is exactly what you just said. Very authentic. You are, just wonderful. So thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, guys.
That was so great. I really enjoyed that conversation. She brought up a few things that really resonated with me. Well, first of all, as a fellow short person, it's
you notice I couldn't really relate. I couldn't step into that conversation.
Nothing. You couldn't contribute anything. But it's funny because I used to be a short, young woman in a room often full of tall, older men. Now I'm less young, but I am still short.
You're still short.
I'm still short. And it's funny because for a long time, I really thought of it as a problem, as how do I establish presence? How do I be taken seriously? So I really, really, connected with what she said. And even though I never got that horrible feedback directly, I often felt it. I felt that, my ambitions were a little too ambitious or whatever. And it's funny, somebody said something to me once, and it really stuck with me around, as a short woman, you can get away with saying things that if you were a big, giant guy, you wouldn't be able to. And for somebody like me, who's actually quite direct, it actually was oh, so this is great because I can be myself. And the fact that I'm small is it softens my directness, which is who I am. So I actually am I'm okay with it now because this is who I am. And I can get away with doing things that my counterparts can't.
Well, I think that the shortness that you guys just talked about, and I think it's interesting because, you and I have not met Sarah in person. We've done everything virtually. I would not have guessed that she was barely 5 feet. Talking to her, of course, I know how tall you are. But I think what resonated for me here was that, this notion that you can't make impact because of X, Y, and Z, whether it's you're short or some people, tall, some women, I'm sure women, some women are bigger and some women are taller and we all have our shtick of what is making us insecure or may impact how our impact is received or how impactful we can be. And I think it really ties to something else that she was talking about. It's probably a theme that people will hear over and over again. And I hope that the over and over again really makes us all think differently about it. But this notion of trying to be someone you're not versus embracing who you are and being that person, you can't stop talking about it because we always have to remind ourselves. So I love that story about how there were two things there. One is that mentor who said, don't aim too high. Yep. Okay. That's tough feedback to have. And I love the fact that she just said, okay, I took it, but then I'm not going to make smaller my ambition. I'm going to take it, but I'm going to really continue to pursue it. But the second was realizing that trying to be someone you're not, versus just embracing who you are and making those tweaks around the edges. look at how successful you can become when you do that. And I think that just really plays. I loved the way she talked about that.
I do too. And I love this idea of this quirkiness where, I can't say enough about how many years I've spent trying to figure out the right approach, the right way to be, the right way to, I always go into meetings being like, okay, don't say too much. Don't talk too much, and it never works. Inevitably, I end up speaking. I even make deals with myself sometimes where I'm like, okay, you are not going to speak in this meeting, and it never works because it's not who I am. And not that everything I say is great, but I feel the need to contribute or whatever. But I think this idea of just be you, however quirky, different, special, you are, and especially if you're in an environment where you don't look like everybody else or you don't conform to what everybody else is like, that can actually be your superpower, and don't shy away from that.
Exactly. Just tweak. Like, I think it's be who you are and be and then adjust how you bring that person to the right places. So yeah, maybe you're not, you can't go through a meeting and not speak because that's who you are, but you're adding, or you're finding your spots and you're not dominating the meeting. And like, there's tweaks to that. So you're very effective at doing it. So it's really, you're not talking about your goal of not doing something. It's really about how do you do what you do in a way that's really impactful when you go in. So I think your observations are bang on. It's great.
Yeah, she was great. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.